Hello and thank you for joining us on France 24. It's time for us to cast our collective eye on Africa. First up, the headlines. Life begins to return to normal in Benin 24 hours after an attempt to overthrow President Patrice Talon was foiled by the authorities and neighbouring Nigeria. The soldiers behind the attempted takeover are still at large, and the officers taken hostage have been released. 100 Nigerian schoolchildren who were abducted last month have been released and are on their way to Niger state capital to be reunited with their families. Over 300 children and 12 teachers were abducted by unidentified armed gunmen on November 21st. At least 100 others remain in captivity. And just days after signing a peace deal with Rwanda, Congolese President Felix Tshisekedi accuses Kigali of violating the U.S. brokered agreement. Meanwhile, the situation in the east of the DRC continues to deteriorate, with the Rwandan-backed M23 rebels continuing fighting. Calm returned to the streets of Cotonou in Benin on Monday after a decisive 24 hours which almost saw the fate of the country change. On Sunday, a group of soldiers attempted to oust sitting President Patrice Talon and were foiled by the Beninese authorities, along with help from neighbouring Nigeria. The government reported violent clashes between the coup plotters and the Republican Guard, resulting in casualties on both sides. The soldiers behind the attempted takeover are still at large, and the officers taken hostage have been released. Speaking on national television, the president declared the situation was under control. Daniel Quinlan takes a look.
Calm returned to Cotonou on Monday morning. Traffic resumed in the streets of Benin's economic capital, with people going about their business. The presidential palace, the scene of clashes the previous day, was secured by soldiers from the Republican Guard. It was in front of this building that President Patrice Talon reappeared on Sunday evening after hours of high tension. Before speaking on state television,
a small group of soldiers, under the pretext of false claims, has staged a mutiny with the aim of attacking the institutions of the Republic and destabilizing our nation, thereby undermining the democratic order. I would like to reassure you that the situation is completely under control, and therefore invite you to go about your business as usual this evening.
A few hours earlier, an attempted coup was foiled by the security forces. A group of 8 armed soldiers appeared on the national broadcaster, announcing the removal of the president from office. They justified their actions by citing the worsening security situation in the north of the country and accused the president of violating fundamental freedoms. To neutralise the coup leaders, the Beninese government called on the Nigerian army, which carried out airstrikes and deployed troops on the ground.
Earlier today, on my orders, the Nigerian armed forces gallantly stood up as defenders and protectors of constitutional order in the Republic of Benin on the invitation of the government.
These forces are to be joined by troops from Sierra Leone, Ivory Coast and Ghana sent by the Economic Community of West African States. A dozen soldiers have been arrested, according to security sources, as perpetrators of the coup attempt, while its mastermind, Lieutenant Colonel Pascal Tigre, is still at large.
And to discuss the situation in Benin further, I am joined by SOAS lecturer on peace and security, Folahanmi Aina. Thank you so much for joining us on the program, Professor Aina. I think the top question on everyone's mind, who are these soldiers that were behind the coup?
Thank you very much for having me. So these soldiers belong to a group called the Committee for Refoundation. And essentially their claims were that the democratically elected government of Patrice Talon hadn't done well enough with regards to fostering security, especially in the northern part of Benin. As you know, Benin in recent times has also had its fair share of jihadi attacks, and so there have been concerns over insecurity. And so essentially, their attempt was to take over power under the guise of trying to foster peace and security in northern Benin and broader Benin.
The Nigerian President Bola Tinubu has dispatched troops and jets to Benin. They've helped out. However, considering the situation in North Nigeria, the security situation, why get involved?
So it's very important that Nigeria took a decisive and swift decision to get involved, because Nigeria, as it is, cannot afford, to have a country such as Benin Republic, which is very close to it, to fall to the hands of a military junta. Again, that would simply give room for insecurity to continue to perpetuate itself across the region. Again, if you recall the case with Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, where the coupists in these countries essentially said that the reasons why they came to power was because the democratically elected authorities were not able to quell insecurity. But the data shows that, unfortunately, since this has happened, insecurity has worsened. And so Nigeria wasn't going to take that chance, especially given the fact that also just barely a week ago, we've seen the similar thing happening in Guinea-Bissau. And so it was more important and imperative of Nigeria as a regional hegemon to step up to the plate and try to quell the situation, amongst other things, to ensure that this situation doesn't further deteriorate and affect its consequently.
And in a broader aspect, Nigeria being part of ECOWAS has denounced the coup attempt and assured President Talon that the bloc would help. Are we to expect then a military mobilization from member states?
Yes, so we already know that Nigeria has taken lead, as it has done in the past in cases like in Sierra Leone, also in the past in Liberia, and even more recently as of 2017, we saw Nigeria take lead in the Gambia when President Yahya Jammeh refused to step down initially. So yes, there might be a reason to have a force eventually take place, occupy the situation to try to quell it for the purpose of ensuring stability. But this remains to be seen. But so far, what we can see on the ground is the fact that the situation seems to have been promptly arrested. So there might not be the reason for a more elongated force in the region. But in the event that the situation further worsens, then we might see other ECOWAS states also getting more involved. As we already know, Sierra Leone, Ghana, and Ivory Coast has already pledged support for a standby force to try to quell the situation. But again, time will tell how all of these plays out.
All right. And how will this coup attempt impact the region, the stability of West Africa?
So it's very important that this coup was nipped in the bud as quickly as it was. Indeed. Because, as I already mentioned, we've seen countries like Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso already fall to coupists. We've also seen something similar happen in Gabon. We've also seen it just as recently as a week ago, the same thing happened in Guinea-Bissau. So it's only very important, that these issues are quickly addressed, and other would-be coupists are not emboldened or encouraged to try to do the same across the West African sub-region. As you know, the region is already very volatile. It's already experiencing some forms of instability, high insecurity. And so essentially ensuring that democracy thrives in the region is critical to ensuring the future of peace and security across the broader region.
Thank you very much for your insights, Professor Folahanmi Aina, a lecturer on peace and security at SOAS. 100 school children have been released after being abducted from the Catholic St. Mary's School in Nigeria's Niger state last month and have been released and are being returned to their families. The Christian Association of Nigeria added that more than 100 students remain in captivity. At least 303 children and 12 teachers were taken from the school by armed gunmen on November 21st, and 50 escaped within the hours that followed. Our Nigeria correspondent, Sam Olukoya, reports.
The hardship the children underwent while being held captive in the bush was quite visible. The Nigerian government said they were released following coordinated operations conducted by the National Security Advisor in partnership with the state security services, the armed forces, as well as other security agencies. But about 153 other children are still being held together with 12 teachers. The government said it is working towards securing their release, with the government providing little details about the circumstance under which the children were released. There are suspicions that the gunmen who abducted them might have been paid ransom. It is believed that ransom had been paid in the past to secure the release of abducted school children. Some Nigerians have warned of the dangers of paying ransom to armed groups, some of which have links to Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. Armed groups often release videos in which they proudly display large sums of money they apparently received as ransom. With insecurity growing in Nigeria, the government says it is open to foreign assistance. President Bola Tinubu has approached his French counterpart, Emmanuel Macron, for assistance in addressing the terrorist threats in the country.
Ivorian President Alassane Ouattara was sworn in for a fourth term on Monday. Among the attendees at the ceremony, 11 African presidents, as well as former Nigerian President Mahamadou Issoufou. Ouattara's investiture comes 45 days after he secured over 89% of the vote in a controversial presidential election on October 25th, which was marked by low voter turnout and unrest. Our West Africa correspondent, Justice Baidu, with the details.
It was a rather sober occasion at which Mr. Alassane Ouattara promised to be president for all Ivorians. This comes on the back of the very turbulent times that heralded the election that saw him get elected for a fourth time in October. In his speech, he highlighted the many challenges that stand in front of himself and the country over the next 5 years, a sub-region that is in a fragile state, terrorist threats, and food insecurity. 11 African heads of state came for this inauguration, including Senegalese President Diomaye Faye and Ghanaian President John Dramani Mahama. Ouattara first came to office in 2010 after a disputed election in which he beat former President Laurent Gbagbo. He oversaw a referendum that changed the constitution in 2016, removing term limit, and said in 2020 that this new constitution reset his office terms, and then he would now begin his term from 2020.
The president of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Felix Tshisekedi, has accused Rwanda of violating the peace deal signed by the two countries last week. The accusations come 4 days after the Congolese head of state met with his Rwandan counterpart, Paul Kagame, in Washington as part of US-led efforts to end the conflict in the east of the DRC. Let's take a listen.
The very day after the signing, units of the Rwandan Defense Forces conducted and supported heavy weapons attacks from the Rwandan town of Bugarama, causing heavy human and material damage in South Kivu, thereby breaking the ceasefire.
And finally, Lagos is gearing up for Dirty December, Nigeria's traditional end-of-year extravaganza. Hotels have been booked and final preparations for festivals and concerts are underway. The cultural staple brings in millions of dollars for the country's tourism and hospitality sectors and comes despite the recent state of emergency declared by the government over the recent wave of mass kidnappings in the north. That's all from us for the moment. Stay tuned to France 24. More news still to come.